jump right into the speakers. Does that work, Vishali, for you?
That's fine.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for joining. I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have today, and was really interested in the conversation that we've already had. So first and foremost, I want to thank everyone for being here. Depending on where you are, good morning, good afternoon. For some, it might be good night. Hopefully not too late for those, and for those states or elsewhere who might be celebrating as well. Happy Halloween or all of that good stuff. So I think we all have a general sense of why we're here and the broader purpose. But I did want to note, in terms of the sub-theme, that really our focus is on housing and finance. And just given that, really trying to dig in and understand that the purpose here is trying to gain a better understanding of the workforce housing and how it contributes to our community. We also need to explore new and innovative approaches to sustainable housing and examine alternatives for home ownership, affordability, and finance. And when I was thinking about this in advance, one of the things when I was reading through some of the materials, it really stuck out to me was one of the final sentences of the broader sort of purpose. And I just want to read that out because I think it's really poignant and can drive some of this conversation, which is that housing finance is sustainable if it enables a large share of the population to fund residential property within an adequate period of time on transparent terms and predictable, as well as affordable cash flows, thus creating stable housing markets with a minimum risk of private corporate failure and public involvement while slashing the emission of greenhouse gases. I think that's a lot. That's ambitious, but I think it's something that all of the folks that we have, the five speakers here, are involved in some way, shape, or form. And so excited to hear from all of them. I will very briefly introduce myself. My name is Daniel Gura. As indicated, I am the Managing Director of Habitat Mortgage Solutions. So I work at Habitat for Humanity International, and I focus on our domestic impact investing. And really my primary goal is to help have a bit more of the bad actors here, but I think we will get through it. I think, whoever that bad actor is, they pale in comparison to the hard work that we do to provide affordable housing. So it's laughable by comparison to the financial difficulties of doing this work, in my view, at least. Certainly is how I'd respond. But to introduce Vishali, she's a core member. She's the acting director for the Urban Economy Forum. She helps guide the overall strategy for the UEF and USA chapter. She started her career in the banking sector and is engaged in development finance by leading multidisciplinary urban projects and integrated cross-cutting themes. She's led diverse teams working at the intersection of affordable housing, infrastructure, water sanitation, energy, disaster response, and social space, with an emphasis on creating equitable, healthy, and sustainable communities. She has established and implemented development projects in Asia, Eastern Europe, South America, and Africa, working in 32 countries globally. He's got more than 17 years of professional experience in leadership and technical experience. And prior to joining the UEF, she served as an intern at the UN Human Settlement Program and successfully worked on the Global Slum Upgrading Fund. In addition to her managerial and technical roles, Vishali is a researcher on thematic areas such as urbanization, climate change, circular economy, and alternative energy sources, diverse and innovative financing mechanisms for projects on urban climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. She has a bachelor's in international studies, political economy, and business from the Henry Jackson School of the University of Washington, and a master's in public administration from Cornell University. She thrives in contributing to empowering society as a whole. And now I introduce you, and we'll turn it over to Vishali.
Wow. Thank you, Mr. Gura. Greetings, esteemed guests and colleagues. It is an honor to share this space with you. In today's presentation, I share hybrid research on circular economy and its importance towards urban development and finance. I will conclude with recommendations and will also make a call to Urban Economy Forum to make circular economy as a priority. The current research indicates demand for more space is expected, and it will double the floor area of buildings by 2060. Most growth is expected in residential construction, particularly in middle-income countries. Why towns and small cities? They are the agglomeration of people rather than economics and political units. Scholarly research and conversations with partners and practitioners indicate that by 2025, 43 million new homes will be built globally. This unprecedented building boom over the next decade creates an opportunity for cities and towns to turn to green construction, which can spur low carbon economic growth and create much needed skilled green jobs. To support the construction world, 80% of the work is being conducted by the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises embedded in the cities and towns. They are credited to generate millions of jobs worldwide. To meet the demand for all stakeholders who support the circular economy business model, towns, cities, and metropolitan regions can play a critical role as matchmakers, drivers, and anchors for people and businesses alike. By doing so, towns and cities become partners and promoters and can build sustainable communities. First, the backbone of supply and value chain that supports the housing and construction industry either works on the outskirts of megacities or in small cities and towns. Therefore, cities can become partners in securing supply and value chain. Second, as it's already been mentioned by many of the keynote speakers, during COVID-19, to find cost-effective shelter, internal migration took place. There's a shift in population from mega cities to small cities or towns. Lastly, cities are the promoters of economic inclusion. They are the presenters of opportunity for businesses and consumers, leading towards developing workforce and jobs and giving urban and small town residents the opportunity to enjoy the benefits of economic growth. In order to upscale the circular economy business model, create a standardized approach and clear guidelines in the construction world, such as building codes and construction practices. It is only possible through policy and regulatory building blocks. Cities will need to attract private sector and social partners to close the financing gap. Good governance is an imperative to attract private financing and to work with the private sector. In order to attract investment, design bankable housing projects, and provide metrics for evaluation and monitoring purposes. To create a competitive advantage of a circular economy in the housing sector so it can compete in the existing market, cities must thrive towards investing in green building materials and efficient construction practices, which reduce cost as well as greenhouse gas emission in residential, commercial, and public buildings. Support and promote micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises that will support the supply and value chain in the construction world by giving them access to capital, technology, and marketplace. Governance in adapting policies, procedures, and processes is the key to achieving sustainable urban development goals, and sustainable financing for all stakeholders is the key to success. Towns and cities play a critical role in supporting the supply and value chain by promoting businesses focusing on green building materials. Towns and cities to provide package services that should include, but not limited to, financing to acquire new technology, circular business models, 3D printing, training, engineering services, and incentives. To make a call to Urban Economy Forum, continue to create a business case for circular economy by bringing together governments, international organizations, civil society, and the private sector to plan, connect, and finance cities in the context of green building and construction practices that will lead us towards housing affordability and job creation. The challenges of urbanization may be immense, but so are the opportunities that come with it. The COVID-19 crisis presents towns and cities with the opportunities for a great reset towards greener, resilient, healthier, inclusive, and sustainable towns and cities. Mr. Gould.
Sorry about that. I was unable to unmute, but I'm back. Thank you so much, Ms. Ali. That was wonderful. And we will, just so folks know, have some time at the end to ask questions as well as to do a bit of engagement from our speakers. Before we move on to the next speaker, Jack, I wanted to just check again to see if Bright or Peter has joined us. Okay. All right. Well, maybe in their absence, I will.
Peter's here.
Oh, okay, great. Hey, Peter, thank you so much. So you're going to be after Jack, but so hang tight for me, but looking forward to it. Thank you, sir. I was gonna, let people know that I could regale you all with photos from my children's Halloween costumes this morning if we were left with lots of time to fill. But I won't do that to you. So next up is going to be Jack to provide a bit of a introduction. I'm always happy to introduce a fellow habitatter, as we say in the habitat world. Jack is the board chair of Habitat for Humanity South Georgian Bay. He's been a resident of Collingwood since 2012 after a 35-year career with the DUCA Credit Union in Toronto. He's passionate about issues that improve the well-being of our towns, from economic growth, inclusion of all people, care for the most vulnerable, and protecting the beauty of the nature we are blessed with. He currently chairs the board of Habitat for Humanity South Georgian Bay, which promotes a world where everyone has a safe and decent place to live. He has also been part of the Institute for Southern Georgian Bay Social Finance and Housing Study Group and the Collingwood Affordable Housing Task Force. With that, I'll turn it over to Jack.
Great. Give me 1 second. I'm going to see if I can share my screen.
I can share it for you if you like.
Well, I should be able to get it. Hang on 1 sec. It should be here.
Okay.
Here we go. Can you see it? Just say yes or no if you can see it.
Could you please try again?
Okay, if this is not working, then I have to, maybe somebody there can share my screen. You have my presentation?
Yes, I'll share it.
Okay, thank you. I got to get back on Zoom here. Here we go. Okay. And if you can go to full screen, that would be great. Even though there's not that much to, let me see, here we go. Perfect, thank you very much. And thank you for allowing me to present here at this forum. It's a real privilege to be coming to you from Collingwood. And share some of my knowledge and learnings for the past few years in relation to social finance and housing. And I will focus on the social finance side because this is way too much. Finance cannot be dealt with in 5 minutes, but social finance I can share very briefly. So as Danielle already said, I'm board chair for Habitat for Humanity, and we really bring communities together to help families build strength, stability, and independence through affordable home ownership. And Habitat for Humanity is a good example of a social finance organization. Next slide, please. Then I've been involved with the Institute for Southern Georgian Bay, along with several other people on this presentation, and we've been studying how social finance can actually work towards improving our communities, building sustainable economies, and especially as it relates to housing. And we basically asked 3 questions. How might we engage our community to illustrate housing needs and support the tools to promote solutions which are sustainable, inclusive, and value people first? In other words, housing for all. And I think that's what we're all interested here on this call. How might we provide our municipal leaders and community advocates with the tools and the narrative to make decisions that reflect our community values in terms of housing inventory needed? And then finally, how might we develop a narrative that links business, employment development, and opportunities to access housing? So these are 3 questions that we worked on. Next slide, please. As we identified how social finance can actually help each community bring better and more sustainable housing. It's been said that the biggest barrier to the Canadian social sector doing its job of tending to community well-being was access to capital. And I think we all know that. Capital is in many ways scarce, but it's also often not knowing where to get this capital. And social finance is essentially creating capital for the common good. Not one person benefiting over the other, but it's basically the old credit union concept where one person has money, another person needs money, and they will lend to each other through an organization to make that happen. We've coined the phrase at the Institute in our work saying that every dollar we spend, lend, or invest locally helps to shape our communities and impacts on our sustainability. And thank you for the previous presentation on the circular economy, because that is really what we're talking about here, is shaping our communities and impacting sustainability. Next slide, please. So sourcing capital, of course, comes from many different sources. We have the business sector, we have government sector, we have the social sector. The social finance sector is in that hybrid space where all three intersect. And it's not one of these that are going to solve the problem, but together we will create the solution. So let's go to the next slide, please. So here are some examples of social finance, mostly in the lending and the investing side. And essentially what social finance allows is community engagement. We all have interest in the well-being of our local communities. And by investing locally, we can actually have the impact that we're looking for. So some examples, and that have been used around the world, and mostly in larger urban settings, but community loan funds, foundation loan funds, there's community foundations that are sitting on lots of capital that they can lend out, peer-to-peer lending. Community investment funds, different than a loan fund. An investment fund looks for a return, and all of these, of course, look for a return. Nobody wants to give their money away, but we can certainly lend it or invest it. Impact investing is another common social finance concept, as well as social impact bonds. They're very similar, but they all have unique nuances. Next slide, please. So there's several non-government organizations that are involved in social finance. Vancity Community Investment Bank, it's an arm of the Vancity Savings Credit Union in BC, and they work together with CMHC to provide funding for housing organizations. Scotiabank, will be hearing from Peter in a few minutes, but really looking forward to what he has to say, because I'm excited for how they are trying to make an impact in the sustainable finance space. New Market Funds is an equity fund organization investing in local communities. The Housing Investment Corporation, an arm of the provincial government here that provides long-term lending to affordable housing groups. Tapestry Community Capital, if you want to do a community bond or similar instrument, they will walk through from A to Z to help you get this thing going for you. Habitat for Humanity, we've talked about. It's a perfect example of social finance at work. And then Options for Homes and Trillium Housing, based primarily in Toronto, but expanding beyond Toronto to provide home ownership through an equity sharing model. A great model, which I'm hoping we can get here in Collingwood someday. Next slide, please. I'm going to quote one of our local councillors here, Carol Merton. She's a councillor in Owen Sound, and she was quoted in the local paper a few weeks ago saying, housing for all means we all have a part to play. Not just the business sector, not just the government sector. We all have a part to play in order to create better and more sustainable communities. Next slide, please. And so finally, my parting thought is that funding affordable housing is not a cost. It's an investment in the well-being and the social fabric of our communities. We all benefit through this. And I'm hoping that as a result of all this work that's being done, and thank you for everybody that's on this call, because we will make a difference and we will create communities that provide housing for all. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Jack. It's well said, and a lot to dig in there, and certainly have a couple of questions for you once we're finished here. So I think we're in Grubhub ad. We're gonna keep it moving. We're gonna keep it moving here. Next up is Peter Johnson of Scotiabank. Peter works with Scotiabank's sustainable finance team, creating and implementing a range of sustainable finance products tailored to specific market needs and opportunities. Clients include governments, financial institutions, and companies from around the world. Peter also manages the implementation and delivery of Scotiabank's $10 billion affordable housing commitment. Scotiabank plans to mobilize $10 billion over the next 10 years in support of Canada's national housing aspirations. By 2030, everyone in Canada, by 2030, everyone in Canada has a home that they can afford and that meets their needs. Peter supported the 2022 work of the Ontario Housing Affordability Task Force, which was chaired by Scotiabank. No further ado, Peter.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Let me just first of all start by saying thank you very much to the City of Collingwood and to the Urban Economy Forum for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. I want to pick up on one theme that Jack had introduced, and it's I think a great concept that it's very hard to cover finance in 5 minutes, but I'm going to do my best, and I know that we're going to have a really good conversation both during this session and certainly after this summit as well. Always happy to engage in further dialogue around this topic. So just a very quick background. I'm probably not your conventional banker. I started my career in the natural resources sector. And my background is all in environment and sustainability, and I joined the bank 9 years ago and started to work in the sustainable finance area and working in our capital markets. So just one very quick piece about Scotiabank. A Canadian-based bank. We're 190 years old. We have about 90,000 employees around the world and really focused on being a leading bank in the Americas. And as was mentioned, one of my focus points at the bank is to manage our $10 billion commitment that we've created for affordable housing. And I think all of us on this summit are probably very well aware of the fact that we're currently facing a number of challenges that are related to housing in this country, whether it's rising interest rates, the affordability of housing in general, the supply of affordable housing, and also planning for the future needs for the new immigrants that will be coming and will be calling Canada their home in the future. So there's been a lot of moving parts around the housing dialogue, both within Canada and also certainly within Ontario as well. And one of the realities that I think we're all facing, and we've been hearing a little bit about this morning as well, is that we all have a role to play in addressing these issues. There's not going to be one specific player that's going to have all of the answers or all of the tools. It's going to take work from all levels of government. It's going to take work from the sectors, the developers, the builders, the architects, the banks, the interest groups, the academics, the think tanks. All of us really need to start to come together to put together some practical realities for how we're going to make these types of things happen. And so this is one of the reasons why Scotiabank came in 2021 to become the first financial institution in Canada to align with the CMHC, their transformation around housing affordability. And we heard from Paul Mason earlier about the work that CMHC, critically important work that CMHC is doing around this area. So our plan is to mobilize $10 billion over the next 10 years to help support CMHC's aspiration that by 2030, everyone in Canada has a home that they can afford and that this home meets their needs. And so this is where we've really started to put together some of our internal expertise, and we've also collecting a lot of input and feedback from many, many organizations and individuals that can help us come together with innovative lending, investing, underwriting solutions for all dimensions of the housing sort of spectrum, whether it's retail, commercial banking, corporate clients, that are all going to have to come together to help support the important objective in Canada for affordable housing. One of our first accomplishments, we held our first Affordable Housing Summit last November. We had 900 virtual participants at this conference, which was a very strong indication just how important this topic is, not only in Canada, but around the world. Our next summit is going to be in January, just a couple of months away, and would be happy to share information as it becomes available in terms of the dates. We envision that it will also be a virtual event so that we can maximize the number of participants as well. When we get into the discussion period, I think I'll be able to spend a little bit more time talking about some of the innovative financing tools that are starting to emerge in the market, like social bonds that Jack had indicated as well, and also the emergence of these ESG bonds, affordable housing bonds, and really innovative, but they're new types of tools. So we're really just starting out down this journey around financing innovation. And then the second piece I just wanted to touch on is really just based on the fact, and this is Ontario based, that we need to build 1.5 million homes in Ontario over the next 10 years. That's just a fact. It's been written about for a couple of years now. The economists have written about it. Last year, the Ontario government, they established the Housing Affordability Task Force. It was chaired by the head of our global banking and markets group, a fellow by the name of Jake Lawrence. And the task force came out in February with a series of recommendations for how to address housing affordability in the province of Ontario. And what was good about that document is that it was concrete and actionable items. And they were realistic things that needed to be done, that could be done in order to really break the logjam around affordable housing and housing affordability in this province. And just a couple of weeks ago on the 25th, the Ontario government, they introduced their new legislation about More Homes Built Faster Act, which is the province's plan. They picked up many of those recommendations that came out of the task force. And if this act is passed, then we're really going to start to see some traction around the movement for the development of single-family homes, townhouses, mid-rises, all across that spectrum of housing that's so desperately needed in Ontario and certainly across Canada as well. And basically, it comes down to the fact that if we want more people to have housing in Ontario, we have to build more houses in Ontario. And that's a whole range and spectrum of the definition of houses and housing and where they're located. And this is not a big city issue. This is something that we heard right across Ontario. And in our research, we heard it right across Canada as well. This is a challenge in our small communities, our medium-sized, and certainly in our urban centers as well. So we have some opportunities in front of us, but it's going to take a lot of us working together. It's going to take a lot of dialogue and a lot of sharing of good ideas. But we do have some opportunities to address these challenges. And, you know, the most important time for us to start on this was yesterday. So hopefully when we have our discussion period, we can get into a little bit more of the details about some of these financial instruments that are starting to emerge and become available. So with that, I'll wrap it up and pass it back. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was wonderful, and agree. I think we should be able to have a really good discussion period of time. So wanted to now turn it over or introduce you first and then turn it over to Randy. Randy is the Deputy CAO for the County of Gray. Randy has worked in various roles for the County of Gray for close to 20 years. He's a Bachelor's of Environmental Studies degree in Urban and Regional Planning from the University of Waterloo. He is a registered professional planner with the Ontario Professional Planners Institute and a member of the Canadian Institute of Planners. Randy has been involved in several key strategic projects with the county, including the county's Community Improvement Plan program, the county's Housing Action Plan, and the Climate Change Action Plan. With that, we'll turn it over to Randy.
Well, thanks, Daniel, and good morning, everyone. Today, I'm going to talk about how Grey County is trying to address the affordable housing shortage through various policies and programs, including financial incentives. Thanks for sharing that slide deck. Appreciate that. So just on the second slide there. First, I thought I'd provide a bit of context about the housing situation in Grey County. Data clearly shows the need for more affordable housing. I think that's, as we're hearing, is across the board in terms of throughout the province of Ontario and throughout Canada. In terms of the housing that's required, it's across the housing spectrum, everything from emergency shelters to affordable rental housing and everything in between. Average housing prices reached an all-time high in our region earlier this year. In fact, we've seen average housing prices increase by 2.5 times in value over the past 5 years. They're starting to come down a bit as the housing market starts to cool due to rising interest rates, as Peter mentioned earlier. Rental housing vacancy rates remain low as well through the county. Next slide, please. Some of the barriers we see in terms of creating more affordable housing include the costs of land, permanent application costs, development charge costs, land development costs, including construction costs, property taxes, and rising interest rates. All these increased costs drive up the cost of building new housing units to the point where they can no longer be rented or sold at affordable levels. In fact, even nonprofit housing builds are not financially viable without significant grants, donations, and incentives. And even then, most nonprofit housing projects are building more affordable and market rental units just to make a project work financially. Other barriers we see include NIMBYism, or not in my backyard, when it comes to either a developer or municipality trying to permit different forms of housing or increasing density and height. NIMBYism often results in delays in making decisions on applications, and in some cases, the applications are appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal. This also has an impact on the cost of housing because time is money. The ability for neighbors to appeal applications could be removed soon because of proposed Bill 23, the More Homes Built Faster Act, which Peter mentioned earlier as well. Other barriers that we see could include municipal policies that do not permit a mix and range of housing types, policies that only permit low density or low height provisions, policies that don't support additional residential units, or policies that restrict housing unit sizes. Next slide, please. So Grey County staff, we've started to dig into the 2021 census data that was released earlier this year. And we're using what is called the Housing Assessment Response Tool, or HART, to try to assess the various household income levels in our county and to assess the maximum affordable housing price range within each income group. Based on the current rental listings within Grey County, the average rental rates are approximately $1,850 per month, which is close to the maximum affordable price for the median household income in Grey County. Therefore, households that are in the very low to moderate income housing groupings, so those are the pink, orange, and light blue that you see on the screen there, they'd be spending well above 30% of their household income based on the current average rental rate listings in Grey County. We're in the early stages of using the HEART tool, but what we like about this tool is that we can explore the range of affordability within each income grouping and then determine the type of housing that's required across that income spectrum so that we can target policies and programs, especially those within the very low to moderate income households. Next slide, please. So what has Grey County been doing to try to address the housing needs across that housing spectrum? County Council has established an affordable housing fund to support new community housing projects. So that's 1% of the annual tax levy is put towards this fund each year, which is approximately $650,000 per year. The county is also working with our local municipalities to identify surplus lands that are publicly owned that could be used to support future affordable housing developments. The county has also worked with our local municipalities to implement a community improvement plan program to provide incentives for affordable housing developments, including tax increment equivalent grants, surplus lands, and waiving or reducing application fees. Grey County has also implemented a development charge exemption program that exempts development charges for new rental housing developments. Developers enter into an agreement with the county, which requires that they remain as rentals for at least 25 years, and they can't be used for short-term accommodations. We started this program about a year and a half ago, and to date, we've entered into 8 agreements, a total of 330 new rental housing units, and we have another 400 rental units close to signing an agreement. Prior to this program, we saw very little rental housing in Grey County. Grey County also provides a full exemption for nonprofit housing developments. So if Habitat for Humanity were building a development in our community, for example, they would be fully exempt from the county's development charges and no agreement is required. We are planning to revisit this program in 2023 to look at targeting these exemptions to affordable rental housing. But based on proposed Bill 23, it looks like we have to revisit this program anyways to align with the proposed changes to the Development Charges Act. Grey County and some of our local municipalities have done some updates to our official plans and zoning bylaws to permit a mix and range of housing types, to increase housing density intensification, increasing height provisions, as of right permissions for additional residential units, and removing minimum unit sizes and letting the Ontario Building Code dictate how small a housing unit can be. The county has also provided funding or surplus lands to support new affordable housing projects, including a public-private partnership development in Durham, a nonprofit housing development in Owen Sound called Adelwa Heights, and we are in the process of renovating a building in Owen Sound to create 12 supportive housing units, which will be complete in the spring of 2023. I'd also like to mention that the county's earlier this year passed a climate change action plan, and we will be exploring completing a green development standard in partnership with our local municipalities and the development community in 2023. So that just provides a quick overview of some of the incentives and initiatives that Grey County is working in partnership with our local municipalities. And I'll turn it back over to Daniel.
Great, excellent. Thank you so much, Randy. I wanted to, before we jump into a bit of Q&A, wanted to one last time see if Bright has been able to join us. Okay, so I think what we'll do is we will jump right into Q&A, and certainly I want to make sure that it's not just me asking questions, and so I'll start with one for the entire group, and then certainly we'll welcome each of the speakers to give it some thought and answer, and then also, you know, I also wanted to make sure that the speakers, if there is more that you wanted to elaborate or something specific that anyone spoke about, also wanted to give you that opportunity. You know, one of the things, Randy, that you mentioned right at the end, which was perfect for me because it's been one of the things I've been thinking about is incentives. Right? We have all of this work that everyone is doing, and aside from the fact that we all potentially have good hearts and understand the value proposition, oftentimes it takes incentives to get folks to do this work, whether it be those with capital or those with assets such as land or materials or skilled labor, or those with the ability to change regulation, right, in order to drive some of this. So one of the things I wanted to sort of propose to each of the speakers, and maybe we'll go down, sort of in order of those that spoke. So starting with Vaishali first, or actually, you know what? Maybe we'll go backwards, Randy. I'll put you back on the spot. We'll go from the bottom up, right?
Sure.
We'll go Randy, Peter, Jack, and then Vaishali at the end. What are your thoughts on how we might better align, create, and structure and incentives to ultimately help with the work that we are contemplating or needs to happen within housing financing?
Yeah, I guess a couple of thoughts come to mind, and as I mentioned, the county currently has some incentives that we've partnered with our local municipalities on to provide through our community improvement plan program. As mentioned, we were planning to revisit some of this in 2023 with our local municipalities to make sure that we're targeting those in the very low to moderate income range groupings. To date, some of our incentives have been around just trying to encourage more purpose-built rental housing, because I mentioned that we hadn't seen very many rental units being built in throughout the county. So we just wanted to spur at least some more rental housing developments, because that's part of trying to address some of the affordable housing that we're seeing throughout the county. But we want to target, I think now, those that are in the very low to moderate income brackets, trying to refocus it so that we're addressing those that are most in need from a housing needs perspective. So that's something that we were planning to look at and investigate further with our new council in 2023. Part of it too is, as I mentioned, we're going to be developing a green development standard, possibly looking at exploring some incentives as part of that in order to, again, encourage types of development that we want to see in terms of energy efficient developments, net zero ready or net zero housing, because that helps make sure that the costs are low when it comes to maintaining and operating those households going forward. So that's also part of the affordability of housing, is being able to afford your utility bills at the end of the day. So if we can make those builds more energy efficient, and the costs are much lower when you build those energy efficient builds first, rather than trying to retrofit them after the fact. So if we can build them right from the beginning, so to speak, it's going to be a lower cost now versus trying to retrofit it after the fact. So those are some ideas or some thoughts in terms of incentives that we can encourage the types of development we want to see.
Great, good, excellent. Peter, I'll toss it to you, and also would sort of maybe even potentially reframe it, right, given that you're a bank, right? So one question could be, what potentially incentivized you all to make your $10 billion commitment, and or are there other incentives that you either use internally to do your work, or certainly that you respond to externally? You're on mute. The phrase from the past 3 years.
Yeah, you think you
right?
think I would have outgrown that by now?
That should have been my Halloween costume. You're on mute. I don't know how to do it exactly.
You're on mute. That would have been perfect.
Right? Exactly.
That would have been fantastic. So the incentives, let me sort of look at this from a couple of different angles. And we'll start with, I think, your initial question about what was the incentive or the motivation for the bank to make this commitment. And I'll sort of caveat these comments that this commitment has come from the top of the bank, from our CEO to the top executives. This commitment was sort of well thought out. And also the partnership with CMHC, critically important for the delivery as well. And the motivation was really around a couple of things. One was to really start to build on this topic that has been sort of bubbling in the background for at least a decade. And it was something that was really advanced by Scotia Economics and some of the other academics that have been writing about this. And so it was sort of raising that problem. The other piece to it is, one of the things that a bank can do is that they have very strong convening abilities. And so when you have that ability to convene different types of organizations and entities to be able to achieve a common goal, there is that opportunity, and that was one of the things that got us behind this $10 billion commitment. We also looked at the dollar figure, how much is going to be needed to make a meaningful impact on the availability of housing. And so we put those all together, and we used that to really drive one of our purposes as a bank, to advance the economy and to be able to advance the ability of people to get into affordable housing. So this was very much a population-driven type of initiative, facing that need that we have in Canada for housing. So the incentives that go into this is certainly there are different types of financing products that are available. There are incentives that are available through CMHC types of programs. There is an investor base globally that is now interested in affordable housing, whether it be through ESG types of bonds or affordable housing types of bonds. If we look at this ESG type of investing, the bonds that are financing affordable housing in 2021, they increased by 288% or 14.5 billion, according to S&P Global. So there is a financial amount of money that's interested in starting to rectify these types of challenges. And so it's being able to connect to these tools and these availabilities that are really the incentives. The other piece that incentivize, and this might be a secondary question, it's around policy incentives. There does need to be changes in policy frameworks. It's not all just about the dollar incentives, because we can have really, really good financing available, but if you don't have the right policies being implemented on the ground, you can still have, the challenges that we're facing now in terms of very, very long approval times, the NIMBYism that was spoken about earlier. So the other type of incentives that we also need to think about are the policy incentives. And that goes into, again, our convening ability. Then these are the types of things that we try and speak about when we have our affordable housing conference is, not only are the financial incentives, but what also or the policy incentives that need to be changed or updated, because a lot of our housing laws and regulations, they're a little old. And they were created, many of them, around this expansionary thinking in the 60s and 70s, where you just build single family dwellings and you keep building and growing and growing. Well, those realities are changing. And now we also have to bring in many other different topics, and some critically important that Randy touched on around climate change and green building, and the adaptation and changing floodplains. And where is it that we're going to be building these types of projects? So it's gotten a lot more complicated because of these new realities that we're facing. So policy and financial, definitely incentives that, again, we need to be collective. And incentives, again, it's not just the private sector. All levels of government have that role. Federal government has announced their Housing Accelerator Fund in the last budget, looking to see that becoming operationalized as well. And then the provincial and the local government. So everybody's got a role to play in incentives.
Great. Thank you, Peter. A lot there, and we can certainly dig into it more. Want to turn it over to Jack. What are your thoughts on incentives, and maybe certainly, you can speak to, how you all have leveraged them or used them in your role at the habitat of South Georgian Bay, or general thoughts on what needs to be there, maybe in order to help do more of that work.
Yeah, thank you. And Peter, thank you. You actually said some things I was going to say. So now I can say a few other things. But indeed, partnerships are the key to making incentives work. It's not up to one individual group. And at Habitat, I guess it's what we experience here. It's a combination, right? So the municipality waives development charges. They reduce property taxes for our builds. But we work with the business community to donate product, to donate labor. And then we worked with the community at large to bring volunteers in to do, like yesterday, we had a group from one of our local big companies here come in and lay sod at our new house that we're going to be doing a key ceremony on Saturday. And so it's everyone working together to make this happen. And it doesn't always have to be money. volunteers are basically helping you save money, but they love to come out. It's a community building activity. But I think the one thing I just wanted to add to all the good comments that have already come out is that part of incentives is also accountability. And I like that what Grey County has done is, yes, we will bring incentives. However, these units have to remain affordable. And I think the biggest challenge that a lot of our municipalities face is, how do you define affordable? And I think that was one of the issues that came out of the provincial task force as well. Like, how do you define affordable? And affordable is different for different people. And so we need to nail that down in order to understand what value the incentives really have. And so that means that we need good data, and that means that we need good business models. With the Institute, I've helped develop a kind of a model which shows where incentives actually bring the cost down, either for ownership or for rental. And there's other models out there that work. So there needs to be a good business model, and then like I said earlier, there needs to be accountability. Everybody's got great ideas, but you got to show on paper. And I'm an accountant, so you don't spend what you don't have, type of thing. And so you come back and say, okay, show me the business model, show how this can work. How are you managing interest rate risk? How are you managing rental losses? All that kind of stuff that comes in with owning a nonprofit building. I could talk a lot longer about this, Daniel. Thank you.
No, absolutely. There are a couple of things I want to come back to that I think connect to everyone's topic. And in theory, I'm trying to think about how we can go sort of from a macro look at some of these questions. I think we've got some time here, another 30 or so minutes, and then we'll get a little bit more micro. We've gotten some good questions in the chat as well, and we'll get a bit more specific. Vishal, I want to turn it over to you to think about incentives, and certainly interested in it within the context of maybe sort of by comparison, at least in my mind, looking at the different speakers, you have sort of a very sort of unique within the context of the broader framework, sort of goal and thing that you are looking to accomplish, right? So this is a thing almost within a thing. And so how do you think about sort of getting that circular economy to be either, incentivize those to do it, to take it up, or what are the incentives that you all are responding to within that work?
Okay, yes, I will respond first from the context from the circular economy, and then I will also state a few of the programs that I've come across that could benefit the areas that we work in. I have also worked for Habitat for Humanity, so I know which areas most of the panelists work, and I've been a banker as well. So for the circular economy, the focus is energy saving, saving in water, and waste management. When you add the cost, it's cost benefit analysis is not working. So the incentives for industry to produce so that it can compete in the real market. So the incentives are absent, and that makes it hard for a developer who is trying to use green products, but they have to wait for 3-4 months, because once they place an order, the manufacturing, whoever's making it, small, medium-sized enterprises, will go make it and then send it to them. Other barriers is the holistic approach across supply chain and value chain. In the circular economy, indigenous practices still hasn't been touched upon, and that's where we can save money. So, for example, IFC created a software called Edge, and this program is not just for high-rise and commercial buildings. It also looks at a house made of straw as a greenhouse. So these are the issues that are there, and because there's no incentive, there's not clear awareness, not a clear idea of how people should work around these low-cost housing, green housing, work. So these are the challenges the circular economy is facing. But if we address them, I think we can create a very low-cost housing sector or neighborhood, or for the people that we work for in the poor neighborhoods. Now, to respond to your question from the financing point of view, there are so many activities are taking place. Coming from the nonprofit sector, the tools like low-income housing tax credit, if we create the low-income housing trust fund, the trust funds are typically funded by the fees applied to the market rate developers. So payment for increased density that are part of the incentive-based inclusion zoning and fees for deed transfer, etc., that can be taken up by the housing tax credit. Another is the community benefit agreement, where you negotiate with the developer, and if they're building a commercial building, they can use part of that revenue for the affordable housing development in the poor neighborhoods, or just uplift the neighborhood. Another one is the anti-crisis housing. Most of these programs deal with low-cost income jobs, like police officers, teachers, but it doesn't look at the students and elderly. So when you bring in the anti-crisis housing, where the house can be provided at a very low cost, but it requires a lot of investment from not just from the private sector, but like family foundations and grants from not just from the city at the city level, but from the federal level. So these are some of the things that I have found that could bring workforce affordable housing. And I hope I'm trying to bring both of these two together, but I hope I have muttered something good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Some wonderful examples and ideas there. Let me go to one thing that I think has been in the chat here, and that is a bit of a conversation about affordable and both sort of what it means, how we define it, whether it is well defined, and then also the thing that I'll say that we are at Habitat in the United States, within our affiliate community, that there is active and ongoing conversation about sort of the value proposition of affordable housing, right? And that value proposition is certainly one of the most obvious things is its value is that it is a house. It is shelter. Shelter has all of those obvious goods to it. Well, one of the other elements for us is obviously that it is a house, it is shelter, and it is home ownership. And home ownership provides, certainly in the United States, one of the primary opportunities for wealth creation. And so when we start to think about sort of financing, the way that we finance things, not just the initial purchase or creation, but also the subsequent purchase or creation, and what does that do to the ultimate sort of stock of affordable housing, we run into something that at times can be maybe a conflict, or maybe just at the very least something that's worth considering, which is the desire and the need for ongoing affordability and the desire and the want for wealth creation, right, through the potential sale or resale of said asset. So I'd be interested in if there's a particular panelist who thinks that there is, kind of this is a particular area where you focused on, or where you have some specific thoughts, I welcome that. And also, think about it within the broader context of not just sort of what we want to see, but also how financing can potentially be innovative to help potentially create some middle ground between those who might say that it is one or the other. How might we create some innovative solutions to really allow for both to happen, right? And if you have any examples of what those innovative solutions might be, I think that would be helpful as well. So I'll open it up to our panelists, and feel free to, I don't know if we have a raise your hand function, but I think there's only 4 of you we can manage. Anyone want to jump in there?
I can start, Daniel, because we're both Habitat for Humanity people, and so I'll jump off from where you left off. And one of the challenges that we have in this current economy is being able to serve more people and yet keep our financial model viable. And our current model is not. And so we're looking at changing how we provide a mortgage. Because sometimes when we try to help someone, we're not actually, we're providing, let's say, a financial incentive or providing a home. But for instance, we're not providing them with, for instance, a credit rating. And so because Habitat gives the mortgage, they don't get a credit rating, and there's no incentive really for them to pay it off because it's a 0% mortgage. So this is one thing we're looking at and saying, you know what, we're not necessarily helping people by doing what we're doing. How can we then make this for the organization more sustainable, but also create wealth and financial responsibility for our homeowners? And so I don't have like an innovative financial model. And Daniel, I'm sure that you in the US are dealing with some of the same issues. How do you build more, serve more, and help more people, and yet remain financially viable as a not-for-profit organization? We're working on it. I'm confident we can make it work, but it's going to take some time. And I look forward to hearing maybe what some of the other panelists have to say.
Great, thanks, Jack. Anyone else?
I think the only thing I could share is the inflation is rising, so government should step in and provide clear guidelines and gain the confidence of the investors, so they will invest into construction and green building materials and green buildings. So I think proper governance and procedures and policies should be in place.
Great. So I will, for the provide a bit of context, maybe in part answer my own question or some of the is driven by some of the questions in the chat. So we have as I mentioned, 1,100 affiliates across the country, and many of them have very divergent views on what this means. And I think there are some questions in the chat that was very specific to how do we ensure that when we create affordable properties that they remain affordable, right, in the future. And I think Jack mentioned some of the incentives from the city or Randy's, what Randy was referring to in terms of that long-term affordability. So we've seen a number of different things, some innovative ideas that I think do work, but also recognize the idea that we want to see that wealth creation. So some of those include deed restrictions that essentially allow for a marginal increase in the sort of extraction of the value of the property over time. So it basically limits the property's a value increase per year. So irrespective of whether it increases at a 10, 20, or 30% rate, the family who's purchased or the buyer who's purchased that unit can only extract 2% or 5%. So each year, essentially, that buyer, if it were to sell it in year 5, the maximum amount that buyer would be able to extract would be 5 times whatever that percentage number is, right? Assuming that the appreciation has been greater than that. So there is ways in which to provide some limitations. Now, again, at the same time, one has to recognize that is absolutely a limitation. Right, there is no, to me, there's no way really around that fact, and the question becomes how do we sort of square those two things together in terms of what those objectives are, and we certainly continue to struggle with that. And where it really starts to hit home a bit for us is the way in which that it frequently can overlap with racial equity. Right, so this idea that certainly in the United States we are in some places largely serving people of color. And so how does one manage the idea that one of the reasons why we see such an inequality of wealth creation in the United States has been through the lack of land and home ownership between those of color and non-color. And now we're going to create opportunities for that home ownership and land accumulation, and then potentially limit the ability to extract the equity or the upside from those. It's hard, it's difficult. And I think one of the most important things is not to run from it, but to recognize it and to make sure that it's a part of the actual conversation. I think that's where oftentimes it gets lost, and we just don't admit the things that are right there in front of us. It is a natural part of the conversation. And while some may not inherently recognize it immediately, down the line when they go to sell, they will, right? We see people who go to sell and they're like, wait, I don't get all of that? Hold on, I'm confused. Why would I not get all of that, right? And so it's because we haven't recognized it up front. And I think for me, one of the most critical things is recognizing it, talking about it, and trying to understand what that value proposition of why we are doing it in that way, because I think there are other ways in which that you can extract that value that doesn't represent just the sale of said property, again, in the using home ownership as a reference point. So I was not supposed to be philosophizing to you all, but I did want to, given that it's really important to us every day here. So I've got two more hands that have popped up. So I'll go Peter and then Randy. You're on mute, Peter.
The host keeps.
Oh, sorry. Maybe that's.
Yeah, the host has to unmute him.
Yeah.
You're unmuted.
There we go.
Let me try. Maybe I can do this.
He's good. We got him. We got him.
Yep, I'm working. Okay, good. So I wanted to back up if I could and just talk a little bit about the finishing point around the incentives, but also around different financing tools and options, because I think there's sort of two things that are going on in the economy right now. One is certainly the traditional or the conventional ways of financing. But the other thing that I think is really fascinating and very important is this rise of what some are calling patient capital. And Jack touched upon some of the organizations like High C, the New Market Funds, where you have a growing number of investors and organizations that are coming together and are willing to pace their returns over a very long period of time in order to get buildings either built or rental units built or renovations of existing stock. And we're starting to see more and more of this concept of patient capital coming into the market, which I think is really important and great to see. The other piece is, reducing the cost associated with housing construction. And the innovation that is going very, very quickly, and the modularization and the use of modulars. I've been through a couple of sessions recently around how powerful modular homes, and it's not just the single family homes, like these are density, these are built properties, or sorry, built structures that can go up to 6-12 stories that are built in various locations around Canada or the United States. They perhaps are going to be built into in a factory and will then be sent by usually truck or train to a location, and then they will be put together and assembled on site. Really significantly reducing the cost associated with the construction itself. So there's great cost reduction tools, and the other piece that addresses is the labor shortage that we're experiencing, I think, both in Canada and the United States, where skilled trades are becoming fewer and fewer. And will we ever be able to get back to the necessary numbers of skilled trades using our conventional construction methods? And so with using more modular structures, we can have those existing skilled trades in concentrated areas, and then also on site doing the assembly. So these sort of types of innovation and new ideas, I think, are going to be very powerful for advancing. So it's not just around the dollar incentives. I think it's new technologies and new ways of thinking about construction that are going to be important.
Great. Absolutely. Thank you, Peter. Randy.
Yeah, just going back to affordability, and this is where I was trying to indicate, we're trying to look at this through a different lens, because affordability varies depending on your household income. So when you use our provincial definition, which is 30% of your household income, if your household income is say less than 15,000 a year, then your affordability, obviously, in terms of what you can afford per month, is quite low. So that's why we're looking at this now, using this housing assessment response tool, is to try to look at the affordability ranges for each income group, because affordability varies for each of those income groups quite dramatically. And so with that, I think, as I mentioned, I think targeting any future incentives should be looking at focusing some of those incentives in terms of the very low to moderate income households. Those are the ones that are, in terms of most in need in terms of our communities. Those are the ones that we're going to want to help support through incentives, because incentives do cost money. They do have an impact on municipal revenues. And so with that, I think, going back to comments in terms of that, we need everyone working together to try to address some of these challenges. And with that, we need the more financial loans and grants and others things that we can get through provincial and federal governments to be able to build the types of housing that we need in our communities is vital. And making sure that that's both accessible, easy to access, as well as making sure that from an administrative perspective, that the reporting of that, how we use those grants and those funds, should be quite minimal. Just not adding more administrative burden to municipalities in terms of trying to report how those funds are utilized, making sure that it's easy to utilize, and so that we can put it and target it towards those households that are most in need. One thing that we have done here at Grey County is, for our rental housing, as I mentioned, we enter into an agreement with developer. They're required to keep those units as rentals for a period of at least 25 years from time of building permit. We haven't got into the affordability side of things yet. And through some of the changes through Bill 23, Bill 23 is trying to define affordability. And right now, the proposal is 80% of your average market rent, or 80% of any purchase price. Well, 80% of average market rent or your purchase price is still quite high. And so again, going back to trying to address the households most in need, for example, if your average house price in your municipality was, say, $1 million, 80% of that is then $800,000. So the affordability for a house in that range is that you're maybe targeting a bit more on what we would normally call more attainable housing. But even then, $800,000 household is those within the very low to moderate. It's still not achievable for those that are within those income ranges. So I think, collectively, between local governments, provincial governments, and federal governments, we need to make sure that when we're targeting those incentives and we're defining what affordability is, we're looking at it through various income groupings, because it's quite, like I said, it's quite a bit different if you're earning $40,000 and less in a household income versus maybe $40,000 to $100,000. Your affordability is a lot different. So we need to look at it through all the income spectrum across that to target incentives and housing that is required for those in most in need.
Yeah, great. And I'm going to get to you, Jack. Randy, one of the things I want to point out is here, we've been looking at a number of different things within my team. And one of the things we found is, in talking to some of our affiliates, depending on the state, to your point about affordability, they recognize that at certain income stratas, that effectively 30 is much too high, because there are core things that you need in order to be functional within the economy. Such as in Florida, a lot of our affiliates won't go to 30% on the front end. A lot of mumbo jumbo mortgage talk financing, but essentially what they say is you need 5 to 10% to pay for your car. because you cannot get to work without a car. And basically at a certain income strata, like you're not going to have enough cash left over in the sort of the rest to be able to afford that car note. So they have to factor in the assumption. So they will only go to 23 or 24 or 25, right? So it speaks to what you're describing, which is that accurate to say that? Because we know that there are other costs that are functionally fixed, that don't change, right? Like your insurance, certain things are functionally fixed, irrespective of what that underlying sort of denominator of total income is. It doesn't matter, right? There's going to be a baseline of how much our car is likely to cost you per month, irrespective of kind of how much income you make overall. So very good point there. Jack.
So I'll reiterate that point. And again, Randy, thank you for the good work that you've done at Grey County and I love that one slide that you showed, because and we've done this in Collingwood as well. We've shown the income stratas for both rentals and for ownership, because we've discovered that that people that own a home generally have twice the income of those who rent a home. And so you got to look at both those numbers when you're looking at affordability. But here's a real life example of what I'm dealing with right now. I've got a house that we're ready to occupy, and let's say it's worth $600,000. 80% of that is $480,000. You cannot build that house for $480,000 when your land alone is probably worth $200,000 or $300,000. And so that's why we do need to have incentives and creative financing to make this happen. On the incentives, though, there's one thing that I've not touched on, and that is where municipalities actually can guarantee a social bond, for instance. It's not money out of the municipality's pocket, but it allows the issuer to be able to issue this bond with less regulatory restrictions and probably a lower interest rate, because there's a higher chance of getting it repaid. So that was just one thing I haven't mentioned yet, but I think it is worth looking at. And I know that we did mention that at the Affordable Housing Task Force for Collingwood, that they should consider this, because it does promote bringing more capital into the market. Patient capital is something that, as Peter mentioned earlier, which is a huge factor in creating more capital for housing, affordable housing in particular.
Great, excellent. One of the things I wanted to make sure we got to, and there's some questions in the chat here, is understanding the context of understanding all of this within the context of the different types of communities where people are living, right? So specifically, obviously, that sort of rural and urban, the difference of the dynamics that exist there. It's something that we spend a good bit of time thinking about here in the United States. So how do we create products and think about some of the needs of our rural affiliates, which can be different, in part oftentimes because of how the market looks at them or their access to capital. So specifically, I know one question was, how do we think about the rural community's ability to access some of this social capital that we've mentioned, and just generally, how do we go about ensuring that we're doing financing in a way to create the necessary affordable units and development in rural communities? So we'll open that up to kind of everyone. If there's anyone who has some specific thoughts, feel free to jump in.
I would say Randy would be the best one to answer that question. But at the Institute, we've actually are working on this toolkit, which includes social finance, which includes incentives, which includes narrative. We've developed a document which is still in the development phase, can't share it just yet, but all the social finance tools that are available for rural municipalities. And it's a very comprehensive document. We're going to try to bring it down to a level that's more manageable for the average viewer. But you know what? We're all working towards the same cause. And you know, the principles that work in a large city can work in a rural municipality, but the players have to be willing to come here and recognize that we are vibrant economies. There is money here. And we just have to loosen it up. And so it works in Toronto. It should be able to work in Simcoe County and Grey County, you name it. Randy, you're probably better off to answer that question than I am.
Thanks for that, Jack. And yes, in some cases, there are some policies or some tools that the province has created. One is called inclusionary zoning. Right now, it's limited to areas where there's major transit stations, and so it's more in an urban context. So inclusionary zoning, for those that are not aware, it's basically, it allows a municipality to require that a certain percent of a housing units are affordable. So if you're proposing, say, for example, 100 unit subdivision, say 1% of those units would have to meet affordable levels. And so based on the current policy environment, and this goes back to Peter's comments earlier in terms of making sure that our policy environment is supportive of being able to utilize these tools, I'd say that's where our best opportunity is to make sure that these policy tools are available for urban and rural contexts, and allow the municipalities then to utilize those tools and shape them to fit the rural context. We have, encouraged the province to allow for municipalities to utilize, for example, the tool of inclusionary zoning throughout the province, rather than just major transit stations or in urban areas, looking at the ability to be able to utilize that tool in any place throughout Ontario. So that's one example of where I think, again, collectively, we're all in this together. We need to look at how we can support affordable housing throughout Ontario. And so that's just one opportunity to be able to just make sure that the policy playing field, so to speak, is equal amongst urban and rural areas.
Great, excellent. So we've only got 2 minutes left. A lot of great questions and comments in the chat. Really would encourage everyone to take a look at them and give them all some thought. I'm going to go sort of rapid fire here with one big question, and then each of you maybe take a second and answer it. If you want to say something different, say something different. It's your time. But the thing that I'm always interested in thinking about is, what's the big thing that you are focused, or that you, maybe even if it's not what you're focused on, but that you sort of wish we could do in order to make a dramatic change. One of the things I've been thinking about pretty significantly is no longer working within the confines of the current financial structure. Here in the United States, we spend a lot of time trying to get banks to operate in better ways, right? We provide lots of incentives. We want to do more and more down payment. We want to do all of these things. And my biggest thought is, why? Why don't we just why don't we stop accepting that structure and those confines and make decisions about doing something dramatically different and try to access capital in that way, right? Moonshot idea, don't know exactly how that works. I have some ideas, but not destruction, but the retrofitting or changing the way in which that our typical financial structure works is one of the things we've been focused and thinking about a great deal. I'll go through each of you and give you a shot maybe to respond, or any general parting shots or thoughts. Vishali, we'll go from the top down.
Okay, if I was not just looking at the US or Canada, I was looking at the middle income countries where the labor is cheap and products can be produced that are cost effective. So if we could provide better incentives to these manufacturing companies, then we can lower the price, and then maybe the financing won't be so heavy because inflation is rising. The credit is becoming more expensive. The private sector is not willing to take a chance. It doesn't have confidence. So how do we gain that confidence? Is by creating that supply demand, and that can only be created by bringing awareness amongst people who will demand that. So we will have that market. So that product from produced by circular economy or green building or green manufacturing, however you want to name it, once that enters into the mainstream, the cost will go down. So maybe we don't have to depend on heavy financing.
Great, excellent. Jack was next. Yes, Jack.
I'm next, yes. So first of all, cheap is not always the solution, and so I think we have technology that allows us to build high quality at a sustainable cost. The other thing is, in order to make a financial model workable, I think we should have mixed communities, ownership, rentals, deep subsidy, medium subsidy, no subsidy, because mixed communities, I think, provide a much healthier platform, and financing that kind of a model, I think, is much more sustainable than financing just affordable rentals or just affordable ownership. So I say mixed use, and cheap is not always the best. So let's not fool ourselves.
Great. Peter.
I'm just going to be quick, and I'm going to say I totally agree with the mixed use concept. I think we can rely on technology for so many of the current barriers, whether it's through the permitting process, the building itself. And then the third point would be execution. Like, we've got to get shovels in the ground. We've got to get walls put up. This has been talked about for years and years and years. And now it's time to move forward and start building these houses.
Yep. Great. Excellent. Thank you, Peter. Randy.
I think my wish, I guess, would be that we're collectively all working together to ensure our policies and programs are building sustainable homes, energy efficient homes, green homes for across that housing spectrum, and looking at through that income spectrum lens.
Great, excellent. Well, I want to thank everyone for the time today, and I know that the part of what the goal here is to think about what are some of the sort of the resolution, sort of the sort of adds to the resolution that we want to make. And I think for the context of the great ideas that we have, and or the things that we didn't feel as though we have answers to, in my mind, I think all of those represent the things that can be a part of the next resolution, right? To do this more, or to do this less, or however you think about it. So I think it's all there. We just got to find a way to pull it out, and to make sure that we were able to describe it succinctly and clearly. So I want to thank everyone for your time, and I will turn it over to the moderator and whatnot. But thank you again to all of our speakers. Wonderful commentary.